One of the data types we haven't looked at yet is the Lookup Wizard. And I'd like to use the Lookup Wizard in the design of the call table. So I'm going to right-click TBL Call and click Design View. What I'd like to do is then click on Subject and change the text data type to a Lookup Wizard. When I choose the Lookup Wizard, this following window appears, and I have one of two options. I might want the lookup to get its values from another table, or I might want to type the values that I want. I'll choose the second option. I will type the values that I want and click the Next button. This particular drop down is going to have one column, and under the heading Col 1 I'll type Contract, press a down arrow, Meeting, down arrow and Support. So I'd like to change Subject into a lookup or a combo box, which is one column wide and has 3 entries in it. So I'll click Next. I'll keep the label Subject, and I can limit them to the list that they can only choose one of those 3 options by ticking this. I could also allow them to choose multiple options if I wanted to, but I'll leave that clear. And I'll click Finish. To just see the impact of what's happened here, I'll click on the View button to go back to the datasheet view. I'll save Yes, and when I click on Subject, I can now see I have a drop down. And I have 3 options. I can choose Contract, Meeting or Support. So the Lookup Wizard lets you create what's called a combo box or a drop-down box where they can choose from a list of options. I want to return to the design of my table, so I hit the View button to the far left of my ribbon. I'd also like to change Call Type to a Lookup. Call Type is a text data type, and I'm going to change it to Lookup Wizard. I will type the values that I want and click Next. It's one column wide, so I'll click under the heading Col 1. I want the value email, fax, phone or visit to appear. And I'll click Next. I'll keep the label Call Type, and I might limit them to the list, but I don't want them to allow them to choose multiple values, so I'll click Finish. If I then go to view my datasheet view and save Yes, I can see that Call Type is now dropped down where they can choose one of those 4 values. If I then go back to the design of my table, what I now want to do is click back on Subject, and in the bottom half of your screen where we've been using the general field properties, you can now use the Lookup Properties. When I click on Lookup, it basically tells me that this is a combo box, which is a drop down, and that the source of the combo box is a list of values, and those values are Contract, Meeting and Support. And it's in here that I could add extra options and just follow the syntax that's already there. So I might go semicolon, double quote, and give them the option Other in double quote. Basically it's one column, and that column is 2.54 centimeters wide, and it will list up to 16 items before they have to start to scroll. And here's where I've limited them to the list, that they can only choose what's in the list. If I was to look at Call Type in the top half of my screen, I'll click, and in the bottom half of my screen I can also see its Lookup Properties. And again, it's a values list, a list of values, and they are email, fax, phone and visit. There's only one column, it's 1 inch wide or 2.54 centimeters, 16 rows deep before they start scrolling, and again they're limited to the list. And I'll just check that when I added Other to Subject that it actually has worked. So I'll go back to viewing my table and datasheet view, save Yes, and when I click on Subject I should now have Other. When I'm designing a drop down, I often try to make it that each option starts with a unique character, and that way when people are doing data entry they just have to hit C for Contract, M for Meeting, S for Support or O for Other, and it makes it quick for them to do data entry. It also means that they can't enter anything that's not in the list, and therefore you don't get invalid data in your database. But if I want to make a drop down, say for employee ID or customer ID, I don't really want to type all the employees because that information's in the employee table. If I have a large list that I want in my combo, and it's a list that's undergoing quite a bit of change on a regular basis, then I'll make a drop down that gets its information from a table or a query. Let's try this. If I go back to the design view of my table and I click on Employee ID, I want to change text to Lookup Wizard. This time I want the lookup field to get the values from another table or query. In fact, because I'm doing employee, I want it to get its values from the employee table. So I click next to the first option. I tell it it's the table employee that I want it to get its information from, and next. Then I tell it which fields I'd like to show. What I would like to show is employee ID, so I hit the greater than sign to send that across. Then I want to show the last name, so I click that and send it across. Then I want to show the first name and send it across. And that's about it. Then if I click next, I'd like to sort the list by last name. So I hit the drop down here and I choose last name. I may even want to sort it by last name and then by first name if I've got a number of employees with the same last name. And I'll click next. Here's my list and what will appear. What it's doing is it's hiding the key column, and the key column is employee ID, because if I untick this, I can see employee ID. But this doesn't really make a lot of sense to the user. It's more that the database needs the ID, so I hide this column. They really just need to see, first of all, a list of last names sorted, and then a list of first names. And I'll click next. I'll keep the title employee ID, and I can enable data integrity, which is probably a little bit much at this stage, so I'm just going to hit finish. It says, do you want to save the relationship? So what's happening is that there's a relationship now created between the call table and the employee table, and again we'll look at this in a little bit more detail later. So let's just say yes to save the relationship. Now when I look at the lookup properties for this particular employee ID field, this is not a values list as subject and call type were. This is a table of query, and it's using a select statement to select from the employees table employee ID, last name and first name. And it's put it in the order of last name and then first name. The column that is bound or ultimately stored is the first column. So employee ID, even though they don't see it, is ultimately the value that will be bound and stored in this field. The columns, there are three of them. They are employee ID, last name and first name. So there's three columns. The width of the first column is 0, so the user doesn't actually see the employee ID. They just see the last name, 2.54 centimeters, and the first name, 2.54 centimeters. And yes, they're limited to the list. So let's just go and look at the data sheet view. So I'm going to click the View button. When I go across to Employee ID and I hit the drop down, I can see that the Employee ID is hidden because it is 0 centimeters wide according to the properties. Then there's the last name and then there's the first name, and it's sorted by last name. What I would like to do is see some column headings on these so that they know that this is the last name column and this is the first name column. So I'm going to go back to Design View by hitting the View button. When I go to the properties, the lookup properties, I might set column heads from no to yes because I want to see column headings. And if I go back to viewing my table and data sheet view and save yes, what I'll see now when I click Employee ID are column headings saying that this is the last name and this is the first name. So technically there are three columns in this drop down. It's just that you can't see the first column, which is employee ID, because it's 0 centimeters wide. But it is actually the employee ID that's stored in this field, even though the last name will be shown. Let's make another one. I'm going back to Design View, and I want to make it that when they choose a customer, it gets the customer information from the customers table. So I'm going to change the data type text to a Lookup Wizard. I want the lookup field to get its values from another table, so I choose Next. And the particular table is the customer table, so I choose TBL Customer and Next. I want to show the customer ID, the last name, the first name, and I think that's about it. So I click Next. I want to sort the list by last name and then by a first name, and Next. So this is what they'll see. It'll ultimately bind or store the customer ID, but I want it to be hidden, so I keep this ticked, and that'll make it 0 centimeters wide. So hide the key column and Next. I want to keep the label customer ID, not really worried about this stuff yet, so I click Finish. It wants me to save the relationship now between the call table and the customer table, so I go yes. When I look at the properties, I can see this is a combo box. Its source is a table or a query, and it's selecting the customer ID, the last name and the first name from the table customer, and it's ordering it or sorting it by last name and first name. What is ultimately stored and bound in this field is what's in the first column, which is the customer ID. There are in fact 3 columns. I do want to see the column headings, so I'll set that to yes. The first column will be 0 centimeters wide, so they won't see the customer ID, but it will be bound, and that the other 2 columns are 2.54 centimeters wide. And the width of the entire list is 5.079, and they're limited to the list. So let's just view the data sheet view. So I'll click the View button and save yes. And when I go to Customer ID, I can see that I've got the column headings, and there's the last names, and there's the first names. So the data type Lookup Wizard ultimately creates what they call a combo box in Access. So now I want to enter some data. The subject is meeting, so I press M and then Tab. The date is 1/9, the 1st of September. The time is 9 which is 9 AM. The call type is E for email. The employee is D for Davilo. And the customer is BR for Brown. So you can see how easy it is to enter data when you've got drop downs or lookup or combo boxes. So I'm just going to press Tab and enter the next record. And so I've entered data into my table, and it's nice and quick and easy if you make drop downs. It means they can't enter invalid data, and try to make it that the first letter is unique.